We basically nuked a town with chemicals.
Health and environmental concerns continue to mount throughout the American heartland this week after government and railroad officials intentionally released thousands of pounds of vinyl chloride, a known carcinogen, into the atmosphere.
Hey guys, it's Lavender here, and I'm back with another Pure Files video. Today I'm doing the Pure Evil files of the railroad train files. So let's get into a deep dive of this political topic activism video. So yeah. Impacts on biodiversity, the environment as a whole, environmentalism, pollution, climate change crisis, health effects, etc. when it comes to the railroad industry. The known effects of railroads on wildlife include the direct loss of habitat, degradation of habitat quality, habitat fragmentation, barrier effects, disturbance, increased human exploitation, and morality. Hundreds of thousands of bison were slaughtered by hunters, travelers, and U.S. troops and military. Trains shipped bison carcasses back east for machine belts, tongues as a delicacy for food, and bones, bison bones, as a fertilizer. When the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, it accelerated the dissemination of the species, and by 1900 nationalists estimated less than 1,000 bison remained. By the late 1880s, the endless herds of bison were wiped out and just a few hundred individuals remained. Near extinction of the majestic animal deprived the plain indigenous people of their livelihood, culture, etc., and resulted in tremendous suffering, not only for, the species of bison, but also for the indigenous people there and their culture. Wildlife responses to railway effects vary among species. For example, railways can act as barriers to movement of some species such as marbled salamanders, reptiles, and Mongolian gazelles, deer, moose, etc. Stopping migration routes prevents gazelles from reaching their traditional food-rich winter quarters and grounds, potentially increasing their likelihood of winter mortality due to starvation. This conservation problem is compounded by the current climate change crisis, as drought events reducing vegetation in the area, and vegetation productivity as a whole could require gazelles to migrate longer distances. Although frequent railway use could result in increased mortality risk throughout wildlife train collisions, a general comparison of wildlife railway mortality and use from both studies suggests that animals who were carnivores were more adapted to avoiding train collisions than herbivore animals and certain types of birds. Herbivores are generally struck more often by trains than carnivores as a whole, than herbivore animals and types of birds. Herbivores are generally struck more often by trains than carnivores, the study had concluded. Bumblebees provide an example of a species to which the railway is a behavioral barrier. These species are reluctant to cross railways because of their high, fidelity to their foraging site. On the other hand, most of the translocated gatekeeper butterflies cross the French high-speed rail to return to their capture plot, as this species showed a strong homing behavior. Railroads in the railroad industry lobby to carry hazardous biohazard reactive chemicals on trains. There is evidence that soil and hydrology contamination may affect vegetation and aquatic plants and activity in those areas. The abrupt change of soil required to establish a railway embankment leads to vegetation loss, ecological loss, compresses the soil and compromises water drainage. Thus, the soil becomes exposed and subject to an increasing runoff that promotes its erosion and land erosion. The erosion of rail embankments can result in a washing out of the sediments that causes water pollution. Furthermore, noted that the soil erosion and deposition alter the biological process of carbon materialization in the soil landscapes, which affects the soil quality, hence, and the vegetation in the area. The disconnections can have a significant impact on the ecological function of riparian landscapes by negatively impacting and affecting the floodplain evolution. rapine ecosystem processes, and associated biodiversity with these areas. Fuel combustion, track absorption, and freight leakages cause most soil and plant contamination. Fuel combustion, track abrasion, and freight leakages cause the most soil and plant contamination as a whole because their emissions are neither chemically or biologically degraded. Similarly, heavy metals found in the water bordering the tracks are often caused by leakages from petroleum products carried on the system. Most rail yards operate round the clock with style lights allowing nighttime operations in those areas. Of particular concern are diesel particulate emissions, which have been linked to lung cancer and other health effects. In 2005, the California Air Resources Board conducted health risk assessments for the 18 major California rail yards. The HRAs found that in total of the 18 rail yards are responsible for 210 tons of diesel pollution emissions a year, posing a significant public health risk and putting more than 3 million people's lives at risk, as in being elevated risk of cancer. 4 of the rail yards pose an excessive cancer risk of 500 through 33,000. 4 of the rail yards pose an excessive cancer risk of 500 through 3,300 chances per million. This means that people living in close proximity to the rail yard have a higher risk of cancer compared to other residents who do not live near the yards. Norfolk Southern derailed on the town of East Palestine, Ohio, spilling toxic chemicals into the environment, which includes, the soil, water supply, and land. The sending up of toxic fumes in the air pollutes the air as well. They have been affected. They've offered only $25,000 or $5 per person. The railroad industry is worth $55 billion as a whole. Biodiversity has been highly affected in these areas, with the water supply contaminated, the soil contaminated, people's chickens, local chickens and fish dying in the area, and foxes also are dying. Reporters have been arrested because the United States is a fascism regime police state who puts profits over lives, as usual under a capitalism system, which includes the lives of animals, people, and Mother Earth herself. Chronic exposure to road, railway, or aircraft noise seems to be associated with elevated blood pressure, heart problems such as heart failure, etc. In fact, noise, light, and vibration pollution due to railways have been observed to reduce the abundance of richness in some insects, amphibians, reptiles, and birds, and to cause avoidance behavior on predators. Noise can affect communication among bird species that use calls or songs to attract and bond with mates, defend territories from rivals, maintain contacts with social groups, beg for food, and warn of danger from approaching predators. This disturbance can cause birds to accelerate hatching, abandon their nests completely or territories, or occupied territories, and leading to hearing loss among bird species. So when it comes to the history of railroads and treatment of employees, there was abuse of labor and destruction of the labor movement. That is a known fact. The Transcontinental Railroad harmed indigenous people worldwide and hastened the destruction of the buffalo, leading to them being almost entirely leading them to extinction. They opened lands to farming before the production was needed, leading to oversupply, the economic collapse. They brought in open-range cattle, a poorly run industry as a whole. Chinese laborers earned between half and two-thirds of what white American laborers did and had to pay for their own food. In the summer of 1867, thousands of Chinese workers organized the largest labor stoppage in America up to that date and demand both equal pay and better working conditions. Railroad bosses, capitalist pigs ultimately broke the strike by withholding food rations and threatening violence if they did not, stop what they were doing, and the workers' demands were denied. Railroad CEOs were paid over $200 million as workers suffered. The CEOs of the 5 largest railroad companies have been paid more than $200 million in the last 3 years. A 6th railroad giant is controlled by billionaire Warren Buffett, a typical capitalist pig whose net worth jumped by 50% during the pandemic to $100.1 billion. Warren Buffett earlier this year bragged to shareholders about how huge his income and earnings were even after accounting for worker pay. And here are some other CEOs that, gained billions while the workers suffered and exploited them of the fruits of their labor. Keith Kroll, the CEO of Canadian Pacific Railway, scored a 58% raise in 2021, taking home $26 million in compensation. James Footy, the CEO of the rail transportation holding company CSX, got a 17% raise that same year, earning $16.6 million. Union Pacific CEO Lance M. Frizz was paid $14.5 million, 162 times the median employee salary at the company. Norfolk Southern James Squartz made just over $14 million, or 140 times the median worker. Canadians National former CEO Jean Jacques Rillis earned a paltry $9 million by comparison. Railroads lobbied to carry hazardous, biohazard radioactive chemicals on trains while slashing the workforce by 30% so they can rake in more of the capitalism profits, leaving the railroads understaffed and the workers' employees exhausted. Railroad corporations are blocking safety regulations to protect profits. For years, rail companies have resisted federal safety regulations to cut costs and have railroaded their way, into getting what they want. The major train derailment in Ohio recently, which resulted in the emergency evacuation of the residents in the nearby areas, that has killed biodiversity in that area, is the fruit of such profit maximization. Before this fiery biohazard radioactive Ohio train derailment prompted emergency evacuations in Ohio, the company helped kill a federal safety rule aimed at upgrading the rail industry's Civil War-era braking systems, according to documents released. Though the company 150-car train in Ohio reportedly burst into 100-foot flames upon derailing and was transporting materials that triggered a fireball when the chemicals were released and incinerated, it was not being regulated as a high-hazard flammable train, federal officials told The Lever. A federal agency sided with industry lobbyists and limited regulations governing the transport of all hazardous compounds. The decision effectively exempted many trains hauling dangerous materials. Specifically, regulators killed provisions requiring all rail cars carrying hazardous flammable materials to be equipped with electronic braking systems to stop trains more quickly than conventional air brakes. Instead of investing in the safety features, the 7 largest freight railroad companies in the United States, including Norfolk Southern, spent $191 billion on stock buybacks and shareholding activities between 2011 and 2021, far more than the $138 billion those firms spent on capital investments in the same time period. American railroad workers are criticizing a new restrictive attendance policy at one of the largest railroad freight train networks in the U.S., as they are experiencing grueling schedules, work hours, and labor cuts in the midst of a new union contract negotiations, which have hit an impasse, prompting federal mediation. And, Jim Crow, Joe Biden got involved and, sided with the pro-capitalism industries, and basically shit on all the workers and all their hard work, typical, capitalist pig, typical U.S. imperialist, typical Joe Biden. The Guardian spoke with several railroad tradesmen and engineers who requested to remain anonymous as they are prohibited by their employer from talking and speaking to the media and being a whistleblower. On February 1st, BNSF Railway, one of the largest railroad freight networks in North America, implemented a new point system attendance policy criticized by workers and unions representing about 17,000 workers in the industry for more restrictive, insensitive, going to work, fatigued or ill. They're promoting going to work, fatigued or ill, and increasing threats of discipline and disciplinary action. One train engineer in the network's Great Plains region claimed they had to push back a medical procedure for a chronic illness to the summer when they'd had more vacation time off scheduled, as they would have used nearly all of their attendance points acquired for the time off needed for the procedure. We feel stabbed in the back, completely demoralized with the work we did through the pandemic, understanding the situation, going the extra mile and doing what we're asked to do, and then some time without complaint, said the worker. Fatigue is a chronic issue that almost everyone I know has, experienced, I've worked with. We managed it so it doesn't get too severe. We've been struggling through the pandemic with fatigue, exhaustion, and we have no chance to ever really catch our breath. Despite the grueling, work schedules, workers explain there's no room for error because in this, industry, you have to be careful because, again, there are some, trains that are transporting hazardous materials and it could end in disaster. Fatigue is very common in the railroad industry. 31 different studies have indicated that long hours, exhaustive workloads, and pre-dawn or late night shifts, and several other factors that cause an insignificant sleep are commonplace for railroad workers. Sleep apnea led to multiple train accidents within, 13 weeks of one another, etc.